Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. So we do the weekly meta breakdowns here on the channel where each week we look at the best performing decks on the arena ladder for each of the best of one and best of three formats: Historic, Standard, Explorer, Alchemy when relevant. And we get the data from Untapped, which you see on the screen. It's a tracking tool that's used for aggregating win rates. Link is in the video description below if you're interested in that. I thought today we would look at the best performing Historic Brawl decks. Now, Historic Brawl is intended at some extent to be a fun format. It's basically the MTG Arena version of Commander, but it's 1v1 as opposed to best like a 4-player multiplayer. So the main focus should be always to have fun. If you're not having fun in Brawl, there's no rank ladder, stuff like that. Just give up on the game and just queue up another game. There's pet cards, there's pet commanders, stuff like that. So I would preface saying if you do want to go with that angle, play the cards that make you have the most fun. This isn't intended to be a card for card, take those. However, saying that, there's always the folks, myself included at times, where you want to win and you want to play the best deck. Competitive EDH is a thing as well. So if you want to play best of best, these are some of the top performing decks of the week. And really, this is kind of give you some ideas. You could substitute cards here and there, what you have, what you don't have, and kind of go from that sense there. So I wanted to get that out of the way first because it's not like where it's standard where you're trying to get Mythic number 1, for example. You want to play the best deck. This is more of a guide to see what's popular in terms of win rates and what's kind of the top tier of the Brawl ladder. So the number 1 deck and the number 1 kind of commander is Rusco the Clockmaker. So the Alchemy drop, 4 mana, 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you get to conjure, so put into the play a card named Midnight Clock. So the clock, once the clock strikes 12, you get to shuffle your library in hand into your graveyard, draw 7 cards. You can pay 3 mana to put counters on the clock, and then at the beginning of each upkeep, you get a counter on the clock. Rusco also works that whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you get to put an hour counter on the clock, and gets you that much closer. And you also get to gain and drain for every non-creature spell. So this is really a Dimir control deck that lets you just kind of keep cycling through your deck, keep refilling your hand. The thing is, usually going 1-for-1 counter spells or removal, you eventually run out of gas. But with Rusco, you just get to keep refilling your hand. And your win condition is just interacting with your opponent while Rusco just sits there and kind of drains along the way. So this deck's just got a whole bunch of options, and I'll paste the deck list. Don't worry about copying 1-for-1. But the core of this deck, let me do it this way, easier to see. Ramp, whole bunch of ways, bobble, cheap spells that also trigger. A lot of just kind of card advantage, card selection, cheap counter spells, miscast, spell pierce, swan song. Things really that when you cast Rusco, you have 1 blue mana up. So you want to be able to leverage it, wash away, stuff of that nature. You have blink effects, Siren's Ruse, where was it? There's a couple other blink effects. Where did I go? Oh, Essence Flux. So Essence Flux, you can cast it the same turn and get 2 clocks out of it. So kind of some nice utility there. Counter spells, stuff like that. So you're really just trying to counter. Ideally with Displacer Kitten, you could just kind of create loops of like bouncing cheap spells and recasting, stuff like that. You have Paradox Engine, where you can just kind of create loops of just generating mana, kind of cast through your deck, and then just kind of keep going to town like that. I'm actually surprised to see there's no Power 9 bird in here. Usually I would anticipate we'd see that card in here just to get you the Power 9 going. Extra turn spells, even time warps here. I was going to say, where's time warp? But you're really just controlling the deck and kind of winning that way. Rusco's your main win condition. Is there even creature lands? There's not even creature lands. So this is really just looking to bore your opponent to death with Rusco and just drain them eventually of all hope, dreams, desires to win, and just really control your opponent that way. We then go to Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, the card that's banned in so many formats. And this is kind of similar elements to the Rusco deck. This is a Simic control deck where Uro lets you kind of get ahead on mana, cards, life, lots of counter spells, lots of ramp in here. You'll see just card draw, counter spells. the more cheap spells you kind of cast that cycle, the more you can get Uro out, kind of go to town there. You have Wilderness Reclamation to tap untap your mana. You're likely winning through like hard cast Shark Typhoon, Mass Manipulation, steal a whole bunch of their stuff. Oracle the Alpha was the card I was thinking of. Kind of just mixed into there. So this is another deck that's just trying to just say no to your opponent as many different ways as possible and using Uro as your win condition. Stuff like Argoths to fill your graveyard, make you tokens. This version here has got a lot more utility lands. You have like Hall of the Storm Giant, Lair, just stuff mixed in. You'll eventually get to the point where you can deplete your opponent of resources and just Uro kind of comes through. From Simic Stompy to Simic Cast All the Big Things, you have Kinnian. Where did Kinnian go? Kinnian's down here. So Kinnian makes anything that taps for mana, tap for 1 additional mana. So all your mana dorks tap for more, your mana rocks, everything like that. And for 7 mana, you can look at the top 5 cards. You put a non-human among them. So you can really just cheat into play stuff like Ulamog, Craterhoof Behemoth, Titan of Industry, Tishana, just like big, stupid creatures. So you want to play like Simic Stompy Ramp. This is a deck to look at. You have some cheap interaction, some counter spells, some card advantage, and then just going to the big, dumb stuff on the top end. This deck's very redundant. Just helps you find all the big stuff and just very cheap to start off. Kinnan just makes you have really explosive draws. Stuff like Relic, also letting you tap your Kinnan for mana is also really sweet. This is usually one of the decks I run into a lot at the top tables. We then get our first non-blue deck, which is Liliana the Veil. So this is a kind of mono-black mid-rangey control. Some cool cards in here is like Waste Not, Tiny Bones, Raven Man kind of mixed into there. Lots of cheap interaction. You're trying to control your opponent's hand. A lot of creatures that happen to discard when they enter. You have stuff like Nyxrid that enters the battlefield. Choose an opponent. It gets -1/1 for each card in that opponent's hand. So this is a card if your opponent's 3 mana 7/7 technically at times. You have stuff like Davriel to tax your opponent. Just lots of kind of ways to deal with, like take advantage of little to no cards in hand. You have some madness effects in here. Invoke Despair, stuff like that, all kind of mixed in. You have Turgid that you can steal stuff. So if you're like in mono black, you want to be hand control, this is an option for you there. We are then looking at Eseka, God of the Tree, which is really you're casting for Prismatic Bridge, 5 mana enchantment. Beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker, put it into play. So you get to cheat into play stuff. And the stuff you're cheating into play is typically really big stuff. So kind of similar to Kinnian, but without the mana commitment each turn. This is usually a 5-color control ramp deck that's going to like Jin-Gitaxis, Vorinclex, Toxrill, Sarah's Emissary, Nyx Bloom, Coma, Vorinclex. You got some Planeswalkers mixed into there. So a lot of powerful top-end stuff, and the rest of the deck's really just ramp to get ahead, cheap interaction along the way, and then you're just trying to cheat out one of these big, powerful bombs as early as like turn 4 or 5, and then just win that way there. Similar in mono black, we have Gix Yawgmoth's Praetor. So this one's a mono black list, but attacking at a different angle. You'll notice the curve here. A lot of cheap cards, a lot of cheap creatures, just varied kind of evasion, stuff like Vault Scourge of Flying, Vampire the Dire Moon, just being death touched. Like just cheap cards that keep refilling themselves, so you're going to try to aggro out your opponent, kind of mixed into there. Just kind of a lot of ways. You get Call the Death Dwellers back stuff, Corrupt on the top end, Invoke Despair, Gix, Eldest Reborn, Phyrexian Obliterator. So some cool cards kind of mixed into there. Gix Puppeteer seems really sweet in here just because you're going to be drawing a lot of cards in the deck anyways. We then have Radek Tal Zealot. This is another alchemy legendary. So this is a Knight's Matter. So for 4 mana, 4/4, hexproof from white and from black. So it can't be targeted by your opponent's white or black spells. Whenever one or more knights you control attacks, you draft a card from Radek's spellbook. So that is 15 cards to choose from. You get them in installments of 3. And it's a whole bunch of knights. It's like stuff like Midnight Reaper, Knight of Grace, Knight of Death Shadow, just a lot of the knights you see in the deck to begin with. And this is just like a black-white's Knights Tribal deck that's just trying to jam out your opponent. Lots of cheap kind of interaction in there. Again, hand hate, some cheap and removal kind of mixed into there. Some Planeswalkers and like Elspeth, Wandering Emperor mixed in. You have Lord effects in a way of like History of Benalia, Chapter 3 popping off. Nadar is so good in this deck. Nadar is just so good to begin with. It's unfortunate mono white was like had so many good 3-drops, but I love this card. So kind of all mixed into there with the deck. We then have a Gruul aggro deck. We have Minsc and Boo Planeswalker. So 5 mana, 3 loyalty. At the beginning of your upkeep, you get a Minsc and Boo token, which is a 1/1 haste with trample. Plus, you get to put 3 counters on target creature with trample or haste. So at a minimum, you get a 4/4 trample haste every turn. And then you can -2 to sacrifice creature to throw damage at an opponent's like face or permanent based on the creature's power. If it's a hamster, you draw that many cards. So it's a threat, it draws you cards, it's removal, all kind of mixed into one. And this is a deck that's just got a lot of stompy elements. You got some ramp in there, some interaction, and you're just trying to like Gruul smash. So like I have a Halana and Alana deck that I play that's a little bit more creature heavy, that's got like a counters theme. This one's probably a little bit more interactive. It's not hit by your board wipes as well. And it's like against all those counterspell decks, if you sneak in Minsc, they have a harder time of dealing with it than something that's just like a board wipe necessarily. It also provides a lot of card advantage, but a cool kind of build with stuff like this if you're looking for a more aggressively slanted Gruul deck. Speaking of aggressive decks, Adeline, Resplendent, Kathar. If you want to get under all those counterspell decks, well, Adeline just says play 1 and 2 drops, play me, and smash face. So this is, again, just looking at this curve, just a bunch of cheap 1-drop creatures. 1 mana, 2 power creatures is where this deck wants to be. Bunch of utility 2-drops and just good cards. You have like Clarion Spear with a cheap curve that you get value out of. Like pump effects like Pride of Conquerors. Even just like Raise the Alarm adds so much power. Like Servo Exhibition. Just creating lots of bodies in the deck is what you're trying to do. Like Trial of Solidarity, another pump effect. Ketra's Monument lets each of your creatures populate more creatures. A lot of kind of value with stuff like that. Even something like Makiti Stampede could just overwhelm your opponent, kind of mixed into there as well. Also, the mana base is very cheap in this deck. This deck's probably actually pretty budget friendly if I would take a look. Because like a lot of these creatures just happen to be uncommon. So if you're looking for more of a budgety way to get in, like your mana base is pretty cheap and stuff like that mixed in as well. And then lastly, everybody's favorite dragon, Nicol Bolas God Pharaoh. So this is a Grixis Control deck with a big 7 mana Planeswalker that if you get it down on the board, it's just gonna really just have a fun time with your opponent. So this is another deck that just wants to say no to your opponent multiple ways. Not as much interacting on the stack as something like the Rusco deck in terms of counter spells, but hand hate, removal, sweepers, discard, Valkyries, Croxas mixed into there. A lot of ramp in this deck. You got Nicol Bolas the Ravager, Nicol Bolas the Dragon God, Nicol Bolas. You got a Dark Imitations, Hour of Devastation, just does damage to everything except your boluses. Kind of all mixed into here. So Planeswalker, Grixis Control, if you're looking at something like that element, definitely check out something like this. This deck's probably the opposite of the Adeline deck, where you can see just everything is a rare or mythic for the most part. So that's it for these decks. Like I said, let me know what you think of this. I can do this periodically if you're interested, and the metrics kind of support it to see what decks are really popular in Historic Brawl. And like I said, if you're looking at those other formats, Standard, Historic, Explorer for constructed decks, including like win rate percentages and stuff like that, like you see here, those videos come out weekly in the playlist as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.